As I mentioned before, after the council's action on the emergency ordinance, the Planning and Zoning Commission formed a task force to provide some recommendations, or a subcommittee. That effort was chaired up by Jerry Schutz from the Planning and Zoning Commission, as well as Jim Boland from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Councilmember Krause served as a city council representative. We had Gina Tricio as a Chamber of Commerce representative, Jim Miller from Prime Land Cooperative, Joe Power from Tri-State Stores, Jonathan Billing from Archer Photography, and we had staffer support from Kevin Lilly, a city engineer, and Doug Freeman from the Idaho Transportation Department. The recommendations of their efforts, they conducted several meetings, as I mentioned before, and they reviewed the significant components of the ordinance, including what zoning districts should the signs be permitted in, what should be their permitted size, how dynamic elements should be regulated, what brightness standards should be implemented, and a few other miscellaneous items. This definition is essentially the same definition that is in the emergency ordinance, but it defines a dynamic display sign as any sign that is capable of displaying words, symbols, or figures, or images. It can be electronically or mechanically changed by remote or automatic means. It also has an exclusion to a sign that accurately displays only the current time, date, and temperature, and which does not contain any copy or commercial message within the dynamic display portion of the sign, and which does not exceed 10 square feet in size, shall not be considered a dynamic display sign for the purposes of this code. This is your traditional bank date, time, and temperature display that would be excluded from that definition. As the committee looked at location, the committee felt that the sign should be permitted within the motor business, general business, and industrial zoning districts. That's consistent with the emergency ordinance. With respect to size, the subcommittee felt that there should be a maximum allowable amount of dynamic display on an individual building lot. Currently, the emergency ordinance only regulates the maximum size of any individual dynamic display sign to be no more than 100 square feet in size, but it does not preclude a 100 square foot freestanding sign or a 50-foot monument sign or another 50 square feet of wall sign on one individual lot. And so the subcommittee felt that there should be a limit on that lot. The subcommittee also felt that within the general business zoning district, no single sign should exceed 100 square feet in size, and that there would be no such limitation of any single sign size within the motor business or the industrial zoning district. So you could have a dynamic display sign that was 150 square feet in size, or that area could be distributed upon different signs. You could have a 100 square foot freestanding sign and 50 square feet on a wall sign, if you wish to, in those zoning districts.
Both of them dynamic display?
Correct. Because the sign code only, it manages how much signage could be on the property, but there are a variety of different types of signage, and only certain zoning districts limit the total amount of signage that can be on any individual lot. The central business district is one of those districts.
So as that recommendation, I could have 3 50-footers.
Correct.
Freestanding?
You are limited by the number of freestanding signs based on your street frontage.
Zoning code.
So, yeah, under the zoning code, you can have one freestanding sign for every 300 feet of street frontage that the property has, or lot frontage that the property has. So if you had a 900-foot long lot, you could have 3 50-foot square foot dynamic display signs.
Thank you.
As we looked at the operational standards for the subcommittee, the committee felt that the city should adopt the Idaho Transportation Department standards, which included a prohibition against any kind of animation or moving display, with the except of the transition time. That the message or image on the dynamic display sign must remain static for a minimum of 8 seconds. That the automated change, so the transition, must be accomplished within 2 seconds. So as you may recall, the emergency ordinance had a minimum display duration of 5 seconds. So this would increase that to 8. And then our transition time was 1 second, and this would increase that to 2. And that the dynamic display must not emit or utilize any sound or smell that is capable of being detected. As it looked at illumination, as I mentioned, the committee recommended that the standards, that the maximum illumination shall be limited to 8,000 nits during the daytime and 500 nits during the nighttime. We did do a number of measurements and did a kind of an on-site demonstration where we had a sign company representative that brought down a truck-mounted dynamic display sign, as well as brought down a foot candle and a knit gun for us to look at various brightnesses, both during the daytime as well as the night. We also took some measurements of, we did this in the Tri-State parking lot. Joe Power made the property available for us to do the demonstration. And we also measured some of the surrounding signs. So we did take some measurements of the Tri-State sign at that point in time during the daytime. And it was running about 8,250 nits, so right around the brightest messenger display that we saw was just a little over 8,000 nits. And at nighttime, I think it was running about 625, 620 nits during the nighttime. I think as far as the daytime brightness, the committee felt that the 8,000 nits would be generally acceptable from their perspective, and the 500 nits, which would reduce about a 20% reduction of the current nighttime brightness of the sign, would also be a reasonable standard to be applied.
Bill, please remind us, what did you say the brightness of the sun was in that sign?
Well, depending upon the citation, it was between 5,000 and 7,000 nits as far as daytime brightness. So
It's one that your mother will tell you when your retina's out, okay?
yeah, which so
Thanks.
yeah, so that was the recommendation of the subcommittee. The subcommittee also felt that it would be appropriate to include a foot candle standard as a secondary method of measuring the brightness or managing the brightness of these signs. As I mentioned, a 5,000 nit brightness in a well-lit urbanized area may be certainly acceptable, but a 500 nit sign out into a very dark, more rural setting may be too bright, and the sign maybe south of town is an example of that. So the committee felt that the foot candle would be a good method of measurement as a secondary measurement, but also to try to manage, I guess, these sign installations in areas where the ambient lighting may be fairly low. So they recommended that we also include a limit of a 0.3 foot candle increase so that could be utilized to manage brightness of those installations in a relatively dark setting. The subcommittee also recommended that dynamic display signs should be equipped with automatic dimming technology, which adjusted it based on the ambient light conditions, and that another element the committee looked at that was not included within the emergency ordinance was the committee felt that it would be appropriate to apply these illumination standards both to standard non-dynamic internal illuminated signs as well as the dynamic display signs. So the draft ordinance has the limitation of the 800 nits and the 500 nits to be applied to basic internally illuminated signs as well, so non-dynamic display signs. We did measure, for example, the Super 8 sign because it was on the property where we were, and the measurement that we received was about 175 nits on that individual sign. So I'm not aware of any existing internal illuminated signs that would probably exceed those values, but that was a measurement that we had available on the site.
Walter has a question.
Bill, if I followed you correctly, the emergency ordinance had a 500 nit at night limit in it. And it also had the verbiage to the effect that existing signs, as they're technically feasible, should fall within that?
That's correct.
And did you just say that when you measured the Tri-State sign subsequent to the emergency ordinance, it was running at 800 at night?
It was running about 625.
625. So it was exceeding the ordinance.
That's correct.
Anybody point that out to somebody, or?
They were present when we were doing the measurements. At this point, we were working on formation of the recommendations, and we are looking for the council's action at this point.
So the emergency ordinance was not pointed out to them and said, by the way, thanks for letting us use your lot, but you're exceeding the current ordinance?
They were aware of they were certainly aware of the fact of the standards of the emergency ordinance.
It's technically feasible to turn it down?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And if I may just elaborate on that point, because there was a fair amount of discussion about what is the ability to adjust the signs. And, I think we saw from two members on the subcommittee that own these types of signs from Tri-State and Archer, is that they are, all of them are generally dimmable. And this both was confirmed by the sign company. They have a very similar brightness display as your TV. There's a slider bar when you turn up or down. At this point in time, staff had not made the investment in purchasing the nit gun to assist them in calibrating that until we saw what the outcome of the council's final action was. And so we didn't have the ability to work with them to calibrate that until we will, essentially immediately following the council's action this evening, or whatever the ultimate direction of the council is. But we did confirm that they all have the capability. Some are able to be adjusted by the owner. Some require the sign company maybe to remotely dial into their computer system to be able to adjust it remotely, but they all do have the ability, at least the ones we were looking at, the more common typical LED-type displays do have the ability to adjust their brightness. The subcommittee also felt that it was appropriate to include a statement that no dynamic display sign shall interfere with a traffic control device as determined by the city engineer. And then the display malfunction, which was the same language that pre-existed in the emergency ordinance, would be carried forward as well, that if there was a malfunctioning sign, that it required to disable it, turning off within 24 hours of notice from the city. As we discussed before, the emergency ordinance included provisions that would require existing signs to comply with the operational standards of the ordinance. And as we discussed this among the subcommittee, and we're looking at some of the existing signs, and specifically looking at for example, the East Side Marketplace or the Rosar sign, the minimum display duration may be very difficult for those types of signs to be able to utilize. They have somewhat limited display. They display text only, and trying to display when the sale on eggs is maybe difficult to accomplish with a display duration of 8 seconds time. So there was a section that was recommended by the subcommittee to look at those types of signs, which are intended only to display text messages without graphic images, that are longer than the display area, which do not contain any graphics, may scroll, or portions of such message may be statically displayed for a duration of no less than 1 second if done so in a consistent and predictable manner. This would only apply to any existing dynamic display sign that's in place at the adoption of the ordinance, but it would allow those signs to continue to function in a situation where it would be very difficult to require them to comply to an 8-second minimum display duration. So those were two signs that I think the committee felt needed to be addressed so they could continue to function. And certainly anything that does not meet the structural requirements, whether that's size or placement, may continue as a non-conforming sign subject to the non-conforming section of the city's sign code. The Planning and Zoning Commission, as I mentioned, conducted their public hearing on January 9th. I think that the Planning and Zoning Commission concurred with the subcommittee's recommendations with one exception. The Commission concurred with the total limitation of dynamic display area per lot of the 150 square foot limit, but recommended that no single sign be permitted to exceed 100 square feet in size within the motor business and the industrial zoning districts, and 50 square feet within the general business zoning district. So with that, staff's recommendation is to conduct a public hearing, and upon consideration of any testimony received, approve the proposed ordinance or take other action as deemed appropriate. There are actually two copies of the ordinance because you have the Planning and Zoning Commission's packet. So there is the first copy that appears in the packet has been modified to reflect the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation, and it's only the small change of the square footage, so it's not a large textual change, it's just square footage has been changed. And then the second copy that appears in your packet is the copy that was considered by the Planning and Zoning Commission that includes the size recommendations of the subcommittee. So with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions the council may have.
Thank you, Bill. Sounds like Walter has another question.
Thank you, ma'am. Bill, on your current slide, the second bullet, what was the difference with the task force recommendation versus what the commission ended up recommending to council? So
the task force recommendation was that there would be no single size limit within the motor business, and this should have industrial zone on the slide as well, and that there be a limit of 100 square feet within the general business district. No single sign should exceed 100 square feet in the GB zoning district. There still is the 150 square foot limitation of total dynamic display area per lot in all zoning districts, but there is no single sign limitation in the subcommittee's recommendation for the motor business and industrial. So that means you could have a 150 square foot freestanding sign. The subcommittee's recommendation was that no single sign should exceed 100 square feet in the general business district, so no sign could exceed 100 square feet in that district. Those are really the only differences. So the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation was to limit them to 100 square feet in size, any single sign in the motor business and industrial, and 50 square feet within the general business.
I'm good.
Okay, Dan?
I think it was mentioned in here, and I don't remember if you did or not, but two-sided sign doesn't count against you as having two signs.
Not until the angle between the faces is greater than 135 degrees. So that's how all signs are measured. So once you reach 135 degrees between the faces of the sign and the back angle between the faces, then we start to calculate the total sign area as the sum of the two sign faces. But anything less than 135 degrees, we measure just one side.
So even a 90-degree sign, like, say, on a corner,
Correct.
would only count it if it was, two surfaces of 150 square feet. Should we allow that?
Correct.
It
That's
only
how-
counts as one 150-foot sign.
That's correct. That's how all signs are measured.
Okay.